Good afternoon, everybody. The assignments for the week of May 4th will be at the end of this video, and I'll also put these on Power School Learning. But I will also go over the assignments at the end of this video, but put them online as well. I really liked your answers last week, the ones who did the assignments on checks and balances, Electoral College, what is the most important amendment to you, and the one about the question about the opinion on freedom of assembly when the states were asked to sweep people off the steps of some of the state capitals because of the order to not have more than 10 people in any area. So a lot of good, great answers on that. Checks and balances. Again, probably one of the most important things that the government does for our three branches of government, the Constitution did, was the ability for every branch to be able to choose to make sure that each branch is checked, that one branch can't get the most powerful branch out of the three, that they're all equal power. Most of you all had that. The Electoral College is one of the most interesting things that the government put into place as far as how we pick the president. It first started because they didn't think that the average American citizen could be smart enough to elect a president worthy of our country. So they made sure that the Electoral College was sort of the I guess thing to make sure that we'd still get a good president if all the American public, people who could vote, picked the wrong person. So in each state, you get enough Electoral College voters as equal to the number of senators and representatives that you have. For instance, Iowa has 6 because we have 2 senators and 4 representatives. Back in Washington's first election of 1788, there were 138 electoral colleges. Only 10 states of electoral colleges actually even voted. 2 states hadn't ratified the Constitution yet, and 1 state just refused to vote. So Washington is going on 138 votes out of only 10 states. And the interesting thing about that first election was each electoral college member got 2 votes, and they had a number 1 slot and number 2 slot. And every 138 member picked Washington as the number 1 vote. And many people picked Adams. 38 out of 138 picked Adams as on the second tab, and then it was dispersed amongst probably 8 to 10 other men for that second place. And the rule was whoever came in second became vice president. So John Adams, coming in second, became vice president because of second electoral college votes. What I want to do is I want to go through some of the main things that happened during Washington's time, his 8 years in the White House. And I shouldn't say White House, as the presidency, because he never actually steps foot in D.C. The capital is going to be in New York City. That's where they want it to be. But so that's where Washington starts out at. And some of the most important things that happened during his time was the cabinet came about in the executive branch. The 4 cabinet members that President Washington chose were the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense or War, Secretary of Treasury, and the Attorney General. And why that's important is because the Secretary of Treasury, Hamilton, and the Secretary of State, Jefferson, have 2 distinct opposite views on almost everything in our government. And those 2 people fighting in President Washington's cabinets will lead to political parties down the road because these 2 men just can't get along on anything. So the 4 cabinet members, again, were the Department of War, which would be the Department of Defense, Department of State, Department of Treasury, which Hamilton was the head of, and the Attorney General. One of the things that was interesting about the cabinet was Congress voted to, after they put the cabinet together, they voted that we could actually have a cabinet. They wanted to vote to see who could decide to get rid of somebody if they didn't think the cabinet was doing very well, a cabinet member. And there was a vote on that, and half the cabinet or half the Congress chose that if a cabinet member wasn't doing well, the Congress could get rid of that cabinet member, and the other half of Congress said no, the president should be able to get rid of that person who serves under him. Well, the vote came a tie. John Adams broke the tie, being one of the things he does as vice president. And he broke the tie that said the president should be able to get rid of a cabinet member if she so choose to do so. And as we've seen in the current presidency, many cabinet members only last 4 or 5 months before a president gets rid of them. So we've had a huge turnover in the cabinet already these first 4 years of the current presidency. Another thing that was pretty unusual was they argued in Washington's 8 years on what should we do with the court system. The states wanted all the courts to stay in the states. Some of the bigwigs in Congress wanted a federal court, so they came up with the Judiciary Act of 1789, which let the states keep their courts, and the federal court was added, which would be the most important court, the most powerful court in our country. And that most important court, powerful court, the federal court, could actually overturn a state court decision. And that's still in effect today. And that was in the Judiciary Act of 1789. Another interesting thing was we came up with the Bill of Rights during this time. It was ratified in 1791, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, during Washington's first 4 years. They voted on 12 amendments on the first set of amendments, but only 10 were ratified, and those 10 still today are the Bill of Rights. Another thing that happened that caused a lot of turmoil in our government was the fighting of Jefferson and Hamilton, and they sort of became sort of a North Hamilton, Jefferson South farmer, Hamilton North being big business. They fought over how to pay the debt in our country. One of the things that after the Revolutionary War, we owed a lot of money to private citizens, other countries, and we had to pay back our debt. And one of the biggest sticking points was during the war, we sold war bonds to private citizens during the war, and which would be payable once the war was over. The government would pay you back. Well, a lot of people got nervous during the war, thinking the U.S. might not win the war, so they sold their bonds to speculators for really, really cheap money, at least have a couple dollars. Well, when the war's over, many people who had speculated, who bought a lot of war bonds really cheap, who didn't buy the war bonds originally, were holding thousands of dollars of bonds. And Hamilton said, we have to pay these people back no matter who's holding a bond. We've got to pay these individuals back. Jefferson didn't think so. The South didn't want to do that as well. So the South didn't agree with that plan. Hamilton had to pay people back because it just showed that we would be good for our debt. Well, the decision was this. The South finally said, okay, here's what we'll do. We'll compromise. We'll agree to pay back all the debt holders on these bonds with government money that we're going to tax people on. But we want the capital in the South. And Hamilton had to agree with this to get this law passed. So the capital went from New York City to Philadelphia, which is going to be temporary until the White House was designed in D.C., where it sits now on the border of Maryland and Virginia. So the South got what they wanted, and they thought at least if it was that far south, they won on that compromise. So being the South won their compromise, the capital of our country is now going to be in the District of Columbia, which it still sits today. Another thing that was a huge bone of contention between Jefferson and Hamilton was having a national bank. Hamilton wanted a national bank. Jefferson did not want a national bank. He thought only the politically corrupt Northeast businessmen who are rich would control the bank, and the South would be left out of everything. In the end, Hamilton won. We decided to have a national bank in our country, which would be in New York City. So another bit where these two men did not get along. They also fought over taxes and tariffs, Hamilton and Jefferson did, and over the first 4 years of Washington's term. Another big, huge thing that came up during this time didn't involve Washington, two secretaries, Hamilton or Jefferson, but involved a tax in Pennsylvania called the whiskey tax. One way to get revenue was to tax the farmers who were making whiskey in Pennsylvania money to add to the country's bottom line. Farmers in Pennsylvania didn't want to pay it, So they weren't going to pay it, and they took up arms that they basically told the government of Washington, and you want to make us pay us, come get us, and come to Pennsylvania, Western Pennsylvania, and make us pay it. Washington had to show that we could stand up to a bunch of farmers. If we didn't, the government would have went down the tube. So Washington, his troops, rode into from Philadelphia to Western Pennsylvania to stop the Whiskey Rebellion without anybody being shot or hurt. And it basically showed the people in the country that no state group of people, rebellious group, could overtake the government of the U.S. So it's sort of a win for Washington, even though it was against their own people. The last thing that was a big thing during Washington's whole 8 years was trying to stay out of war again with a European country. France wanted us to join their side against Great Britain. Great Britain wanted us to join their side against France. These two rivals, France and Great Britain, did not get along ever, and both these European powers wanted us to join sides. Every time one of our ships would go into the Atlantic Ocean towards Europe, we'd be detained, pushed around by Great Britain, by France, pushing us to be part of the war. And it almost came to war, but Washington steadfast on neutrality and wanted to make sure that we wouldn't be involved in any war. And probably one of his most important things he did before he left in 1797 was to make sure that we were not to be in a war with Great Britain or France or take sides in this war as well. So he proclaimed that we would be neutral, and that sort of paved the way for John Adams as he went into his 4 years of presidency. 1797, Washington basically was tired of what he'd done. He had done many great things, fought the French Indian War, led the Continental troops victories against the British, went back to the Constitutional Convention, was president for 8 years, and by the time, he didn't have to leave in 1797, but he felt 8 years, 2 to 4 year terms was good, and he wanted to go back home. So in 1797, he retires and goes back to Mount Vernon. Now, the assignments I want to give you have to do, number one, with the cabinet. I want you on question number 1, I'm going to put on Power School Learning. How many cabinet members do we have now under President Trump? What positions are they, and who is in each person's, who's the head of each cabinet? The second part of the assignment is I want you to look at the disagreements between Hamilton and Jefferson and pick out one disagreement. There were more than just the National Bank and tariffs and taxes, but pick out one difference between Jefferson and Hamilton and write out what the argument was between the two and how it got finalized as far as who won the argument. It could be tariffs, taxes, National Bank again, or whichever you see. The third part of the assignment is looking back at Washington's Proclamation of Neutrality. I just want you to be able to define that. Probably the last big thing that happened before he left his presidency in 1797. So again, I'll put those 3 assignments online on Power School Learning. Great job on all the assignments that you had before. If again anybody has any questions, email me if you need to. Thank you.